We're now into the movie recommendation portion of the show. I teased it at the end of the last episode, but the movies we're going to be talking about today, I recommended Heather. I'm going to butcher this title so badly, but Jeanne Dielman, 23, Quai du Commerce, 1080 Bruxelles. Is that right? My fiance speaks a little French, and she's looking at me kind of mad. But yeah, so I recommended Heather that movie, and Heather recommended me Panos Cosmos' Mandy. Kind of going with what we said about like the whole difference between today versus back then. Well, not even the difference, the fact that it is so similar, but it kind of... Well, I mean, I can see why this movie isn't necessarily talked about a lot, but I think that movies like this are important, not even just from the fact that it's an impressive movie, but from the fact that from a young female director with an 80% female crew talking about subject matter that just isn't ever really talked about in such excruciating detail in film. So, before we get into spoilers, Jeanne Dielman is a French film from 1975, directed by Chantal Akerman, who I wish I was more familiar with her work. I know I can think of some other titles she's done, but I think this is the only movie of hers that I can remember seeing. Very prominent female director. This is kind of the movie that she's the most well known for, and it's a film about a woman who's recently lost her husband, and it's just 3 days out of her life, told almost in real time in, like I said, excruciating detail. And just, what did you think about this movie? I don't know what else to say.
I mean, we talked about it a little bit before we started, that, I had mentioned to you, you look at the movie, you look at the runtime, it's about 3.5 hours, maybe a little bit less.
Something like that, yeah.
And it's intimidating. And you watch it, I have to admit, you watch it and you go, yep, this is a French art film.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, it doesn't make it a bad French art film. I liked it quite a lot. There's moments in the movie that are almost hard to watch, not because they're visually hard to watch, just because you're right, there's an excruciating detail of watching this woman do her daily routine for 3 days. And when you had recommended it to me, I did a quick Google search to see what it was and everything, and even the description, which basically says exactly what it is, still not what I had expected.
Really?
And I had said this before as well, that this is a movie that while you're watching it, you don't think much of it, but once the movie's over, it just gets you thinking, and you don't stop thinking about it. And that's where I've been since I finished it. And I mean, I just finished it earlier today, but even yesterday and the day before that, I believe when you'd given me the recommendation, I just kind of kept thinking about it, because it's a brilliant movie, and it's a brilliant topic for her to have covered.
It's, yeah, and going back to what you said about the excruciating detail, I did a little bit of research before and after, and there was one quote. I think she was kind of talking about her movies in general when she said this, but there was a quote from the director. She said, "Often when people come out of a good film, they would say that time flew without them noticing. What I want is to make people feel the passing of time, so I don't take 2 hours from their lives, they experience those 2 hours." And I think that's very, very true with this movie. And it's not like, I keep on saying it's all with like excruciating detail and you like really see everything. It's not, none of it is without purpose. Every single little detail in that movie is very, very purposeful, and whether it's informing you about what this woman's mental state is, or just to show like this is her or at the surface level is this is what her day-to-day is like. Every single thing in that movie is serving a bigger purpose, and I think that's very impressive that much thought was given to something as like nuanced as there was a behind the scenes clip I saw where Chantal was like, okay, now when you fold the meatloaf, you have to go back to front because this is why you've grown up doing this, and this is how you've done it. Like, it's so impressive that like that much thought is going into something as simple as like, here's how you prepare meatloaf.
No, yeah, I mean, the perfect thing that I think about that movie is that while it's excruciating for one thing, it's also probably hard for us to watch something like that, just being so used to a 1 to like maybe 2.5 hour movie. And even if it's a 3 to 4 hour movie, you're used to a lot more action than a woman's daily routine.
Right.
But watching everything in almost real time like that puts you almost in her headspace of just this same routine every single day, and understanding where her mentality goes by the end of the movie.
Right. Yeah, and it goes to a place that I wasn't necessarily expecting when I watched it, but it does make sense when you think back on it, because the movie is kind of like, it's not really shown, but it's kind of heavily implied that the first day is a very normal routine, and then by the time we get to the second and especially the third day, like just little things have happened that have thrown off her entire routine.
You almost watch her kind of decline into some, I don't want to say like madness, but
right.
It's some kind of madness that,
like a silent anxiety attack.
Yes, like it's something that, you drop the clean spoon, and for us, you just pick it up and you wash it again. But for someone who's had that routine for, I believe that she's been widowed for 6 years.
Something like that, yeah.
6 years of that same routine, for one thing, could drive a person crazy. And then something as minuscule yet powerful, just like dropping something, you watch her just slowly begin to lose her grip. Exactly,
yeah, and it's almost like you said, like the maddeningness of living in a cycle, but almost like what I took away from it kind of was there is that sort of like maddening aspect of living in a cycle, but I think for her, she kind of, the maddening aspect is when she's out of that cycle.
Oh, I know, I agree, yeah.
She, what I took from it was that, like, that her routine is her way of not dealing with her life, and when she does have that little bit of free time because, like, that shop was closed and she has to find a way to kill an hour, that's when the self-reflection starts to set in, and then that's kind of when everything goes downhill. And it's done so subtly but so beautifully at the same time.
It's written very well in that aspect, like you just said, essentially. But very early on, if you were to go and watch the movie again after watching it your first time, and I haven't done that, this is just something that I remember, but I want to say it's in the first, I believe it's in the first 45 minutes. I think the first 45 minutes is about the first day.
Something like that.
And when she sits down with her son and she starts reading the letter from her sister in Canada, she reads it out loud to him, but there are things that are so personal in that letter that she just reads so casually, and she's very dismissive.
Right.
Because her sister mentions how it's right at the end of the letter, too, that she thinks that, she should get remarried, and that she thinks about her sister, she thinks about her being single and cries for her.
Right, yeah.
And her mother not her mother, sorry. She reads that to her son so casually, and then just folds the letter back up and puts it away and doesn't say anything.
Yeah, exactly. It's just, it's so, it's very indicative of, like, it's just like little moments like that. Well, I mean, that's kind of like your probably only big exposition dump throughout that entire movie. Everything else is kind of like just to serve the mundaneness, but like that's our one little bit of insight that we kind of get, other than watching like the way she reacts to, like, the potatoes are overcooked, or I dropped the spoon. Like, that's all we really kind of get into her character, and it's like you said, it's just it says so much while presenting itself in a way that seems like it's so minimal. Like the fact that she's saying all this personal stuff, or the fact that she's not letting this personal stuff affect. It's like almost like she's reading off like a grocery list or something like that. It's just it's so far removed. When I was watching it, it's definitely, it's a painful experience, but it's like you said, when you finish it, you're glad that you did sit through it, because it's very, very unique, and it's subject matter that is not ever really talked about in that much detail or spun in that sort of light.
Yeah, and as I was watching it, I felt very, like, as I was watching it, I understood, at least I felt like I understood why everything was shot the way that it was and the way that it was written, and I understood kind of the point. I understood the point of the movie, I felt like, and then, it happens at the end, and your I don't want to say your opinion changes, but it's just kind of like you really watched this woman struggle with something that she didn't even know she was struggling with. And then kind of snap, really.
Right. And I guess with that we can get into, I don't know, there's probably not many people out there like, oh, I was waiting to watch that movie, why'd you spoil it for me? But it's, I guess we can get into a spoiler talk here a little bit. With that ending, one thing that is a big aspect of the movie is that she has essentially become, I don't want to say like a prostitute, but she's opened herself up to like men to call on her as a way of bringing in money to support herself, and it happens on each day that we see like a new man come in, they go to the bedroom, and then cut to everything being over. I feel like in any other movie we would have gone into the bedroom and we would have seen everything happen, but it's not really ever like dwelled on until we get to that ending scene, which we can come back to. But one thing that I kind of liked, that I thought was really refreshing, is that they don't dwell on that. It is just kind of, it's you her
see the door
routine.
Close, yeah.
Right, it's her routine, and this is just part of her day, and it just like it was refreshing. I feel like, because it makes her feel it makes her feel, but as when I was watching it, I got the sense of like, this is kind of another way of her assuming control over her own life. In that I set my routine and this is what I'm doing. This is just another part of my day, and it's not exploitative. I feel like in any other hands it would have just been like, okay, let's see what's in there because we have to see what's in there to put butts in seats. But I don't know. That was one thing I thought was really cool, is that they didn't dwell on it.
No, I agree with you.
They just treated it normally.
Yeah, I focused on that a lot as well, especially because the way that the entire movie was written and shot is that you're almost in real time watching almost everything you do. I believe right after the first day, after the first man leaves, I think she takes a bath. And you watch her take a bath. There is nudity in that scene. You watch her take a bath for almost 6 minutes, I think.
Something like that, yeah.
And then immediately after that, she gets dressed and you watch her clean the bathtub. And that's essentially what the whole movie is. I mean, there's a point where you genuinely watch her from start to finish make a whole meatloaf.
Yeah.
So it was definitely interesting to me that they, she was showing her entire life except for that one part. And for me, when it comes down to even what we were talking about earlier with women, that in the 70s and 1975 and even up until, not that many years ago,
the height of like exploitation film.
Even back then, she was doing essentially what the general housewife is supposed to be doing, even though she didn't have a husband in this movie, and it's brought up that she may not have even loved her husband.
Right. She, going off what you said, she literally, there's a line where she's talking to her son and she's like, that's just what we were supposed to do. Yeah.
And she was like, I just wanted a kid. So, yeah, and I think it's interesting that, I think it says a lot, and this is what stuck with me, that they were showing her day-to-day life of her doing these chores and taking care of the baby that she babysits and everything like that. But it almost makes me, and like that almost makes me think that the fact that they weren't exploiting her her everyday like routine with these men, it makes me almost think that it was her representation of saying this was such a taboo thing. Whereas in the 70s it was, pretty, when it came to like housewives and everything, it was pretty taboo for a woman to talk about herself having sex, whether it's with her husband or not. And at the same time, it wasn't quite as taboo for men. at that time period.
It's never been taboo for men.
Never
I'd
really.
argue.
Yeah. So that is a big part of what stuck with me in that movie, is just that they were really representing the real life of a woman that could have been in the 70s, that she couldn't talk about this even though it's the thing sustaining her, and the fact that she is putting herself through that whether she necessarily wants to or not. Yeah. Whichever one, because they never really, they insinuate that she doesn't necessarily want to do it, but at the same time, you know, there are people that could want to do that.
Yeah, and I think for her it's just a means to an end. It's just like, it's just another thing where it's like, I don't want to be alone with my thoughts from 5 to 6, so what can I do? Well, I need money anyway, so like, let's do this. It's a way I don't have to deal with my life.
And it's also very interesting that she doesn't speak to the men.
Barely,
yeah. I mean, I will say there's not a ton of dialogue in the whole movie altogether anyway, compared to many other movies.
Right. Like you said, I think the most dialogue in that movie is when she reads that letter. And
I think maybe when her son is talking to her before he goes to bed. But it's like, I mean, the men come in the house and she silently takes their jacket and their hats and everything, puts them away, and you see them go in the bedroom and shut the door, and that's almost one of the only things that you don't see in real time, because the next thing you see is them opening the door
and coming right back out.
Every single day except for the last day, the man goes, "I'll see you next whatever day of the week it is."
Right.
So you learn that it's a consistent routine for her, that she does do this almost every day, if not every day, since we're only seeing 3 days.
Right. So I guess let's talk about that, because you mentioned it a little bit, but one thing that I kind of am still a little bit unsure about is that ending, where, for just clarity's sake, over the course of the 3 days, we see day 1, her very normal routine, day 2, a few things are out of place, and then day 3, think that she's kind of becoming a little unhinged, and ultimately her session with that man on the 3rd day ends with almost we finally do see inside the room them having sex, and it almost seems like, whether it's because of her routine becoming unraveled or because of her self-reflection, she's almost like, regardless of whether or not she enjoyed it before, it seems like she's definitely not now, and it ends with, after it's over, her killing the guy and then sitting quietly by herself. And one thing I was still kind of unsure about is, I guess, why do you think that's the way that her expression came out, I guess?
Yeah, it was quite the ending, and I mean, when you think about it, in the grand scheme of 3.5 hours, it's about 30 seconds in the whole movie, which says a lot. That says a lot to me as well, because she doesn't do it in a way that seems like she really wanted pain upon someone.
Right. It definitely doesn't seem like it was premeditated. I think it was definitely a heat of the moment thing.
Yes, definitely.
Because it's like, again, it's just, everything is like, okay, we use the scissors to open the package, and we'll put the scissors back in the drawer. Oh wait, I can't do that because he's here and I'm so off my thing, I'll just leave them here for now. I feel like it was definitely like, okay, this is what I have right here.
Yeah,
Let's do
and
this.
I mean, something big that I noticed about that scene is when after they're finished, she's sitting at her vanity where the scissors are, and the perspective is, you're looking, I can't remember I believe you're looking at kind of the back of her head, but there's the mirror where you can see the man sitting behind her.
Yeah.
And he lays back, like he grins or something, like a smug grin, and like lays back on the bed. And I mean, of course this movie's no stranger to long takes, but she just stares at those scissors for at least 30 seconds with such disdain. And you can tell that she definitely thinks about it. It wasn't a heat of the moment, she just grabbed them and did it. She definitely thinks about it before she does it. And I do think that it's just this representation of both self-reflection and becoming unhinged at the fact that her routine is falling apart, And I think it's almost like, you know, I mean, you're graduated now, but I'm also in a position, and you were at one point too, where you're like, I don't know, what am I going to do without school? Because that's kind of all you've known.
That's a good point.
And that's where I think she was at in her mind, where she was like, if my routine's falling apart, what am I going to do after this? If my routine, if I don't have my routine, what do I have? Kind of thing. Because, I mean, essentially you have to think about the fact that generally she's been having this routine for about 6 years, at least since her husband died. And 6 years is a long time to have a routine like that, and I'm sure that would drive someone to do a lot of things if they're really that worried. Like, it's honestly, to me, a good representation of anxiety, if anything.
Yeah, and I still kind of, I'm not entirely sure how I do like that the movie is essentially like a long form. This woman is becoming unhinged. I'm not entirely sure how exactly I feel about the ending still, which is why I'm glad that for your insight right there. But that's not to say the ending detracted from the experience of watching it. I think it's a very powerful movie. It's definitely very, very hard to get through. I've only ever seen it the once, and I can't imagine trying to get through it again. But I do imagine that it's going to be one of those scenarios where if I do ever decide to watch it again, it'll just be one of those picking up more details, and
Definitely.
the appreciation will only grow. So yeah, that was Jeanne Dielman. I think I haven't rated it officially on my IMDb, but I think I am feeling like an 8 out of 10, maybe even a 9. I don't know. I'd have to think about it a little bit more.
I use, admittedly, I don't actually rate my stuff on IMDb usually. I usually rate it on Letterboxd.
Okay.
And
yeah.
they're a 5-star
Okay.
rating. I was probably going to give it a 3.5 to 4 stars, because I definitely, as much as I probably complained while watching it, I respect the movie so much, and I think that it is definitely a great movie, and I would recommend it to people, but I'm probably not going to, because I know they won't watch it.
Exactly. Yeah, it's one of those movies you brag that you got through almost.
Like, a lot of my friends that knew I was watching it, when I was trying to kind of not spoil the end for them, I was kind of like, do you want me to just tell you, because I know you're not going to watch it.
Right, yeah. But I think it's definitely, if you do have the patience to sit through it, you definitely should.
Agreed.
It's an amazing experience.
It makes you think in hindsight rather than while you're watching it. Like I said, I'm gonna continue to think about that movie.
Yeah, in summation, it's painful, but it's worth it.